The pride, passion, and pageantry of college football lives here. This is the Paul Finebaum Show, Hour 2 podcast.
This might be college football heaven.
We are back, another hour. Don't forget tomorrow the CFP meets in Dallas, and what will they do in reaction to what happened last week in New Orleans with the Big Ten and the SEC. Mark Schipper is joining us. We have talked to Mark in the past, and certainly this is some of what he has been sharing with us, writing about the airplane conference. According to him, a shock went through the country when the Big Ten added 4 West Coast teams, and now, of course, so much has changed. There are allegations of a money grab. Is that an upset? Is that a surprise? Anyway, let's get Mark on here and try to unpack what exactly is going on right now in college football. Mark, thank you. Great to have you back. So tell us, how concerned should we be about the future of this great sport?
Hey, Paul, great to be back. Thank you for having me on. How concerned? I'm not sure. Let's see what shakes out over the next year or two. I think the Big Ten and the SEC attempting to grab up so much power bilaterally is probably not a great thing. So I think they need to consider the rest of the sport and their power league peers, even if they might be a slight step ahead of them in terms of power of teams and recruiting power and wealth and all of that stuff. This sport doesn't exist without the entirety of the landscape. So Big Ten and SEC, you can see what they're doing, but I think they need to be careful. So yeah, let's see how smart these guys are.
Mark, just for the sake of argument, let me sound like I'm the guy in the back row going, what do you mean? Why should they care about anyone else, and what do they need to be careful about?
Well, you certainly have big population centers in the Midwest and the Southeast, but you don't have the entire country, and the Big Ten has the West Coast schools too. But there's a whole big thing called the Great Plains, and there's a whole thing called the Atlantic Coast Conference, and there's a whole lot of people over there, and this country loves football, and it loves college football. And the colorful, quilt that is this sport, the pageantry, the weekends and the different regions and the different traditions and all the things they stand for are what makes college football whole. So not only is there that, I also think there's a level of resentment to these two leagues to think that they can just do this, that they can just buy out the sport essentially and run it as they see fit. It's just pretty brazen at this point. So I think it would be important for them to remember they're involved with a lot of other things in this sport.
Okay. Let me go over a couple of things that are possibly on the table. And as you know, the meeting last week emanated in New Orleans, and the reporting indicated that both conferences want 4 automatic qualifiers to what is likely going to be a 14-team CFP. How does that play in relation to what you have just laid out here in terms of the rest of college football?
Well, I think if they find a way to slam through that particular setup as sort of a prefabricated structure, I actually think you risk a kind of a legitimacy crisis, a little bit of a tied house situation where people look at this as leagues having guaranteed spots in the postseason and therefore not needing to fully compete or participate at the same level that everyone else does who's trying to gain access to this playoff. So it will look to people like the postseason is being engineered, and it's totally unnecessary. There's no reason not to use rankings and seedings at a national level outside of the conferences themselves to seed the postseason. So again, you're looking at a captured situation. And I know one of the things people love about athletics and competition is that it's supposed to be an even playing field. People are supposed to prepare, take the field, compete against each other, and the best team wins. So giving all these major handicaps to the schools that already have massive advantages over the others, I mean, you could look at a serious legitimacy crisis.
Well, Mark, listen, I have to ask you, a legitimacy crisis among whom?
Well, certainly not the Big Ten and the SEC. I mean,
But listen, and sometimes you can be too close to the sun. I don't really like it either. But I also I'm curious who out there is going to call it illegitimate, number one, and who is going to buy that really matters, I guess.
Well, I think that you could get a situation where, year to year, especially with the transfer portal, NIL, boosters, who knows what kind of team you could build in the Big 12, the ACC. You could end up with multiple teams in a given year from the Big 12 and the ACC that are every bit as good as any SEC or Big 10 team and deserve a shot in the playoff. But because you have so many spots bound up already and given to these conferences, you might be leaving teams out that deserve to be in. And it could work in the reverse for the Big Ten and the SEC in certain cases, in which some of their good teams get left out because you got a prefabricated postseason format. So to me, it just looks like an unnecessary move.
Well, I mean, assuming we go to 14, which I think is likely at the beginning, 8 spots are taken. There's still 6 spots left. It's not like that's chicken liver, is it?
Well, I don't know if it's chicken liver, but I just don't think it's necessary to say the ACC gets 2 spots and the Big 12 gets 2 spots and then 1 at-large spot left. And then, the G5 getting 1, I think everybody's pretty comfortable with that because that's just, kind of the reality of the sport. But the other 2 power leagues, giving them half the bids just automatically, it just doesn't make sense. There's just
But Mark, let me look at it from a Big Ten or SEC standpoint. And why should, if you're going to use the logic that you are displaying here, why should they be entitled to anything else? And by the way, that's just automatic. That doesn't mean they can't get in.
Well, I mean, it's the questions you asked me earlier. Is it okay for the Big Ten and the SEC to own so much of the sport and to dictate so much of how it's going to operate going forward? And I'm of the opinion that it's not. I don't think they should do that. And I don't think it's necessary. And I also bottom line, I don't think it's the best playoff format. I think the best team should get in the playoff without an auto bid structure that goes to such an extreme.
But listen, I think there's a concern, though, having spoken to some of the people in both leagues, that this committee has some legitimacy questions based on what they did last year and based on what they didn't do. So, I think it's a fair conversation. That's why we want to talk about it. But I also think there are 2 sides of this.
Oh, yeah, of course. Absolutely. I mean, I'm just offering my opinion on how I see it. So, for me, when I look at what happened this year, I think there are, particularly after just 1 year, these changes are very hasty and very large off just one sample size. I look at what should be done immediately, and there are a couple simple things that they should try, which is reseeding purely on rankings, auto bids for conference champions, but not auto buys. And then I think they should work on the calendar. It felt like the season extended way too long into the winter. It kind of didn't feel like college football in certain ways. I think the excitement around Notre Dame, Ohio State was very low for a pretty big-time national championship game. And so I look at smaller tweaks like that for now and then work on the structure going forward before they sign a long-term contract and just turn over so many bids to leagues automatically when, again, I just don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, so one of the things I've heard, now this is not necessarily from the very top, but among others, is, listen, we are trying to work with the rest of college football. I'm speaking of the Big Ten and the SEC. And here comes the caveat, but if they don't like it, we can move on without them. I know that sounds like we're sitting there at some bargaining table, but I've heard people say that.
Oh, absolutely, no doubt about it. You're actually, when you kind of talk that way, when they talk that way, you're looking a little bit at what they tried with the College Football Association, the CFA, which existed from 1977 to 97. That was the organization that they got the football powers out from under the NCAA's TV contracts with the 1984 Supreme Court decision. And that CFA was based on compiling the country's most powerful football programs into one single association to create a powerful TV slate, potentially a playoff slate, et cetera. And they maxed out at about 63 teams. But the Big Ten and the Pac-10 at that time did not join. So had those two joined, you would have been at 83 teams, and you would have had a pretty tight, top tier of football in that CFA. It didn't work out. It blew up. But, when the Big Ten and the SEC say that, we may break away and do our own thing, there's some teeth to that threat, and they could bring a few more with them, and they'd have a different organization. So, yeah, these things are definitely in the balance.
Mark Schiffer, many thanks. Great to have you on. Mark joining us. So we'll take a short break here. What do you make out of what Mark said? Certainly there has been criticism, even from you, about the AQs, but Mark makes it sound like what the SEC and the Big Ten are doing is an existential crisis to the sport. We'll get your reaction in a moment.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
We are back, and I have a feeling we'll get a little bit of reaction to what Ship had to say. I agreed with some of his points, but I'll let you folks have at it. Let's check in with Tom next. Hey, Tom, go right ahead.
Paul, that guy just does what people in the media do, and it drives me crazy. How many times did you ask him, because I counted, how many times did you ask him, who out there says it's illegitimate? You know how many times you asked him? 3.
A few, yeah.
And you know what? He never gave you an answer. He said, well, I think this, it's me. And then he just said, well, it's just my opinion. That's what these sports writers do. They just make up something that they don't like, and they say there's this invisible group of people out there that agree with them. No one agrees with what he's saying. It doesn't delegitimize the sport at all.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the criticism of the automatic qualifier. It's a fair conversation. But this guy acted like the whole world is going to be underserved if it happens, which is not true. It's very likely that every year the Big Ten and the SEC have the most legitimate teams in the tournament. I don't think that's really a debate.
Also, it's not everybody else's opinion. They do this. It's his opinion, and he doesn't have enough backbone to say, it's my opinion. So he says, oh, well, there's a legitimacy crisis. I keep hearing this. And then you say, okay, well, tell us who's saying that. He can't name one person. He doesn't say conference commissioners. He doesn't say fans I talked to in this district. He doesn't say anything. He just makes it up. Anyways, I just want that. Well,
I'm glad you called. Thank you.
Out of me, Paul.
By the way, I sat there listening to him like you did, Tom, and I did not hear a lot of meat on the bone, as we say out in Texas. I just heard a lot of, the sport is going to be severely poorer if this happens. I'm not really sure how the sport is going to be poor. We're talking about 14 bids. A year ago, we had 4. I don't know. I thought it went pretty well. I'm glad we have more. Not sure it's all that better, but if the Big Ten and the SEC get 8, that's still 6 more to go around. I mean, it's not like teams are going hungry. I have said this repeatedly, and I'll say it again. Beyond 4 or 5 schools, most of the programs really don't belong in there anyway. Let's check out David up next. Hello, David. Go right ahead.
Hey, Paul, I totally agree with your outlook there on his observation. I wanted to talk to you about the gym and the I-Man situation.
Okay.
I heard the caller earlier, and you were talking about you couldn't speak as a minister or a priest, but as an ordained minister of 34 years, I've never agreed with I-Man and his cause simply because he's Auburn and anti-Alabama. But there comes a time when we have to lay all that aside. And now I am fervently praying for him as a human being and hoping that God will touch him and give the doctors the wisdom to be able to help him. And as far as Jim goes, I think it's too late. He may be too far gone for us to pray for help. I think we need to pray for mercy, because I have seen time and again in the last 30-something years, people that do exactly what Jim did, and then they're faced with the exact same situation or even a worse situation. So we need to be praying for both those guys, but especially for I-Man. But I've got a question for you, Paul, about basketball. Got a little bit of ways to go in the regular season, and Alabama has a tough schedule left. But if they can win out, do you see them being the number one seed in the tournament?
Well, I think it entirely depends on how Auburn does, how Duke does, and how Florida does. But my best guess right now is they are not going to be the number one seed. Adrian is up next in North Carolina.
Hi, Paul. I'm calling about what the existential crisis that if we're at the point where we're calling anything related to college football an existential crisis, then we really need to have a talk about how we define first world problems, which is what this is. But I do think that we're kind of unaware of the fact that there's like a bunch of components of this. So the SEC is now going to further cannibalize itself with 9 games. We're going to increase the rewards of mediocrity for schools like Clemson. We're going to have more slots reserved for Indiana. We're going to irritate 75% of the fan bases, and that's a nice word that I'm using. And then we're going to play more lopsided games through January. And having said all of that, I don't understand why we're surprised this is happening when this is all revenue and television contract based. And we're all going to watch it, and we're all going to participate, and we're all going to love the fact that we have more fodder to continue to bring to these kinds of forums and talk shows. And I appreciate the unnamed sources that are contributing to some of the reporting, but at the end of the day, I feel like we're in an echo chamber.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from. The one thing I understand, but I also think it's time is this 9 games. I know that the SEC is going to cannibalize itself, but I think the SEC needs to step up and quit lollygagging around with 8 games. Yeah, is it hard? You better believe it, but you have to be able. There's also no reason why some of the schools lost last year. I understand Georgia losing to Alabama and Ole Miss, but it was inexcusable that Alabama lost to Vanderbilt in Oklahoma. And Ole Miss lost to Kentucky.
Agreed. No, and I agree with that. I think where I do, I mean, just as an SEC fan, is that it is the idea that the problem to me is more with the human aspect of the college football playoff committee for reasons we discussed ad nauseum. And that's just, okay, then let's please appropriately weight losing to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt, but let's also keep in mind what's happened to your team when they've had to, when you look at Florida's schedule.
Right. But Adrian, I think somebody got somebody's attention and they said, okay, quid pro quo, if we go to 9 games, we better have a guarantee. And I think that's where the commissioner is coming from. He knew he couldn't go into those coaches and say, we're going to 9 games, but you still have to earn your way in.
And that is understandable. I still don't think that the Big Ten is even the same as the SEC, but at the same time, I'm going to watch it and I'm going to enjoy it. So
yeah, but you do understand this. The SEC
100%.
Needed a drafting partner, and they chose the best one they could find.
Yeah, and I mean, this is how negotiations work. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a business.
Sadly, it is.
Yeah. Excellent.
Great to hear from you. Thank you very much. Why don't we check in with Susie next in Georgia?
Hi, Paul.
Susie?
I hope you're having a good day.
Thank you.
I've been out of town taking care of my grandson for a week and just got home today and couldn't wait to turn your show on. My call today, first of all, to I-Man. I continue, I-Man, to lift prayers every morning for you. And, the Finebaum family is certainly showing support to you. Right now, I'd like to just put out to the Finebaum family to please lift prayers for the Pope. Being a Catholic, certainly right now, we are praying for our Pope. I don't know if you have talked to the Archbishop recently or not, but the last I heard is he is in kidney failure. which is not good. So out there, whether you're Catholic or not Catholic, if you would just lift some prayers for the head of, the Catholic Church in the world, for our Pope, I would appreciate it. And that's really my call today, other than to say I've missed watching the show. I have them all DVR'd, so I'll watch a whole week of them, going through scanning through the commercials, but hearing the good stuff. So I hope you have a great day again, Paul. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, and I agree with you on Pope Francis. He's having a very difficult time. Why don't we take a break? We'll change the topic to basketball and talk with the leading authority, not only in this country, but maybe in the solar system, on the NCAA tournament.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
It all begins in just a few weeks, the SEC basketball tournament. There has never been one quite like this one. I think sometimes people look up and they see these Joe and Artie projections, and they literally think they're living in an alternate universe. Joe, great to see you. It's been a while, and I know this is an incredibly busy time of the year, but I know that you've exhausted all the in my wildest dreams lines, but tell us about what we're witnessing live right now.
For the SEC, Paul, we're witnessing history, but I think even more than that, we're witnessing excellence. A year ago when the Big 12 was considered the top conference, generally speaking, and even the Mountain West was having a historic year, 6 bids for that league, which they'd never approached previously. A lot of people were saying, oh, well, they gamed the system and they manipulated the net and they had the secret sauce of the computers and all that. Well, no one is saying that this year about the SEC because they're just really good at basketball. And it started with the SEC ACC Challenge. What was it? 14-2, I think, and never let up. And the teams at the top scheduled great. That created a pool of quad one games in league play. And the teams have gone about and won key games, none more so than this past weekend when Oklahoma beat Mississippi State and Arkansas beat Missouri, 2 bubble teams in 2 home games, either of which could have knocked them out of our field, projected field. And now we're looking at 13 bids again for the SEC in the bracket that comes out tomorrow.
Yeah, listen, you've done this for countless years. I still remember, and I know you do, that year sometime 10 years ago, whenever it was, the SEC had 3, and it felt like the world was coming to an end.
Well, and I think it might have taken an upset in the conference tournament to get 3,
right,
if memory serves. So, it can be cyclical, certainly, Paul, but this has been on the horizon for a while. And, I think it also needs to be said that having 16 teams versus 18, say, in the ACC, I think is an advantage because the bottom is smaller. And because of that, there just aren't as many quote-unquote bad losses to have. I mean, even losing at South Carolina or an LSU right now is a quad 2 game. So it's not like you're losing to Boston College or, Cal. So less is more, and you're seeing it reflected on that seeding chart right there with 3 right at the very top. And if you want to look at Tennessee, they're 5th on the board overall. So that's 4 of the top 5 teams in the country hailing from the SEC right now.
So let me start at the bottom because we just had an Arkansas fan calling in, very excited. Arkansas has been that team that has been given up for dead a couple of times and go to Kentucky and then wins over the weekend. I realize it's impossible to project. We have 3 more weeks of basketball, including the tournament. But Joe, at the very bottom, what do you think has to happen?
Well, Al Davis used to say, just win, baby.
Right.
And everything will work out okay. And that's certainly the case with these SEC bubble teams. But in the bigger picture, what I would suggest to fans, of the SEC bubble teams and any really beyond that is bubble teams are on the bubble for a reason, right? If they didn't have flaws in their resume, didn't have flaws in their profile, they'd be solidly in the field, and we wouldn't be having these conversations. And I think because of that, what you tend to see with bubble teams around this time of year is they play about 500. So like a winning streak, and by that I'll define as like 2 games, maybe 3 in a row, is all it takes to get in and stay in. So, I think the first rule is win your home games, because they're that's what the good teams do. And then B, no bad losses. And we talked at the top how that's really hard to have happen in the SEC this year. So, short of losing to the 16th seed in Nashville, I think for the most part, this league is going to be exempt from that worry.
Talking to Joe Lenardi here at the very top, Joe. There's always that struggle to be the number 1 seed. Understanding what's ahead, undecided, of course. How would you handicap that field?
Auburn has lapped the field a couple of times in terms of resume metrics. So those ones you see at the top there are not necessarily created equal. I think Auburn has at least a 2-loss cushion over everybody else. I mean, you're talking about the number 1 schedule strength in the country and a team that is 23 games over 500. Like, this just doesn't happen. And I know they've won a lot of close games and they survived a bit of an injury to their star. And maybe the pendulum swings and they drop a couple here down the stretch. But there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that's going to happen. I mean, they've lost to Florida, another number 1 seed, and they lost at Duke, period. They beat an outstanding Maui field, and they've answered the bell in every other league game. So I think it's going to take a lot to knock Auburn off that perch of the very top number 1 seed. So imagine having to win out and hoping the best team in the country loses at least 2 games. That doesn't necessarily seem likely to me with 3 weeks to go. And the advantage, you might say, well, 1 seed's a 1 seed. The advantage for Auburn would be, of course, being in the South and having the regionals in Atlanta, which would, presumably be a major advantage geographically. The next closest spot would be Indianapolis. So, the possibility of going Lexington, Atlanta, and staying in SEC country would be pretty attractive to me as an Auburn fan.
Yeah, not very far. Before you go, I've spent time on the East Coast, and I know how the cognoscenti of college basketball looks south, other than Kentucky, especially toward a state that I used to live in for a very long time, Alabama. You work in the hotbed of college basketball in Philadelphia. I'm just curious, among your friends that you kibitz with from time to time, how is this turn of events playing with the in crowd in college basketball?
I haven't heard literally one kind of snide remark all season. And I think the ACC actually deserves a little bit of credit here because they were leading the charge a year ago at pointing fingers at the Big 12 and their scheduling and running up the score against, West Jabip State and all that. We haven't heard a peep. And some of that's just common sense. I mean, when you lose 14 out of 16 games against that other league, you're probably best not calling a lot of attention to it. Kind of first rule of PR, when you're losing, just lay low. And I think they also see with their eyes how good these teams are. I mean, I'm looking at Texas with Trey Johnson being a bubble team. Well, if Texas is the 10th best team in your league, that's a really good league. And I just think that the basketball brains. And I get it. For a long time, a lot of the teams, a lot of the schools in the SEC didn't care that much about basketball. Back in the old days of the SEC West, when we were divisional, those schedule strength numbers of some of those schools, it was like they weren't even trying to get an at-large bid. They were just killing time for, spring practice, I guess. But that is not the case. Now, whether that's because of decisions at the league level or the institutional level or both, or a trickle down of resources, recruiting, that's above my pay grade. I'm evaluating basketball teams and their records and what they mean. And what we're seeing in the SEC right now is, I'd like to say, a one-off, because I have a hard time imagining even the SEC itself repeating this.
Great to talk to you. Always a pleasure. Joe, thank you. We'll see you soon. Joe Lenard.
You bet, Paul. And be well.
You too. Thank you so
much. Good luck.
Wow. What an incredible conversation with the most knowledgeable man ever on the subject. We'll take a short break. Get your reaction to all of that as we continue here.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
And this Monday, we'll head to the Zoom right now. Chris is up next. Hey, Chris.
Got some good news for you, and I got some bad news.
What you got?
Man, you believe it or not, man, you made the Clemson Insider, and it was a conversation that me and you was talking about Clemson.
Really?
You said it. Yeah. You said that we had a good chance of winning it all. So the good news is you gained a bunch of fans. The bad news is they Clemson fans.
Well, I tell you, I have to check my health when Clemson fans are saying they like something I said.
Man, they like it, man, because you're actually telling the truth. But I've been defending you, Paul, because if you don't remember 2 years ago, you said that you think that Clemson is a year away, and they'll put it on 2025. So I do listen to what you said, and I'm here to tell you that you don't say everything bad about Clemson, man. You got me. I'm like one of the biggest Clemson fans ever, but I watch your show first before I watch any other show. So, I mean, your show is great. We appreciate your opportunity you give us and everything you do for us. But the last thing I got, and I don't mean to bring this guy's name up because his name was brought up too much in the first hour, but one thing for sure, Paul, we don't have to worry about Jim wishing anything bad on Jim or anything coming back on Jim, because he's an unspeakable host. Even cancer don't want to be in that man's body because he's so honorary, and the way he is, Paul. Even cancer don't want to get in his body, so we ain't got nothing to worry about that. But hey, man, I'm gonna give you a message, man. I know I'm gonna talk to you tonight, but hey, take one day at a time and keep fighting, brother, because when we all here together.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you, Chris. Really good to hear from you.
Take care now.
You got it. Stacy is up next. Hello, Stacy.
Hey, Paul. How you doing? Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
Good. Well, I just want to say this. I listened to Mark and what he said. I mean, he made some good suggestions as far as, the SEC and the Big Ten shouldn't demand a 14 or max. But the reality is, if you go back the last 56 years, I'm talking about 1968. That's when they finally started counting the bowl games to be part of the national champions. We've only had 22 different teams win the national championship. I mean, do your homework. Look at it. I mean, and it's mostly from the SEC, and there's some from the Big Ten. I mean, Nebraska went to the Big Ten, and Oklahoma and Texas went to the SEC. But if you look at it, it's almost justified. I do think they need to have a 16-team, playoffs where, you just start right away. But no, I don't like the bullying from the Big Ten in the SEC. But in reality, like I said, there's only been 22 teams since that's 56 years. 56 years, there's only been 22 teams to win a national champion. Outside of Notre Dame, won their one. But I mean, it's
well, no. Hey, Stacey, I think you're right. I mean, it is bullying, but in reality, I've been on the fence, and when I heard the opposition, I started to come around more to the SEC's opinion. Bash is up next.
What's up, Bash Brother Paul?
Bash.
Hope you had a good weekend. I certainly did. Last week on this Monday, it was a hell start of the week for me, Paul, because as you know, we lost to the number one team in the nation, which drew nearly 3 million viewers, Paul, to then go into Wednesday losing to the freaking Missouri Tigers, Paul. And then last Saturday, reality set back in. Alabama's got a win on their record. And the miserable, mediocre Missouri Tigers lost to the Arkansas Razorbacks the same week, Paul, that John from St. Louis is going to prison in Durango, Colorado. And before I even go on that, Paul, I will admit John is one of the most annoying callers on this show. But do you want to know who is the most annoying caller, Paul?
Who might that be?
Unequivocally, it is Stacy from Birmingham. That dude, Paul, no one cares who your favorite women's basketball team, despite it being in the same conference as your favorite football team, apparently. I went through the same lesson last year, Paul. You remember, I tried to talk about Colorado women's basketball, and then you said, Bash, no one cares about your stupid basketball team. And I agree with that. No one cared about them. So from that perspective, I will say John is annoying, but Stacy, no one cares you're an Alabama fan and that you go for the freaking Lady Gamecocks. Am I right, Paul?
I think that would be an accurate description of all of our feelings, yes.
Thank you. And one more thing before I go. The subject of the day has definitely been about Jim from Tuscaloosa with his comments about I-Men. As you know, Paul, I was the last person on this show to have any contact with him. And, yeah, he cussed me out right after. Thank you. Thank you for taking my call, Paul.
Thank you for listening to the Best of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast. Watch the Paul Finebaum Show weekdays from 3 to 7 Eastern on the SEC Network. Plus, you can listen and watch on the ESPN app.